There is a small group of people living on a river in the Brazilian Amazon who cannot count to 3. Not, won't, cannot. Not because nobody ever taught them. Linguists have tried, for years, with candy, with sticks, with patient repetition, but because their language, Pirahan, does not have the grammatical hardware for exact quantity, above roughly, a few and more than a few. No word for 7. No word for 7 in the way you have a word for 7. And here's the part that should bother you more than it probably does. They don't seem to need it. No anxiety disorders in the population. No word for worry. Not in any form that maps onto what happens in your chest at 2 a.m. So, I want you to sit with a genuinely uncomfortable question before we go anywhere else tonight. Is it possible that some of what you call your mind, the counting, the worrying, the running the numbers on tomorrow isn't actually you? Is it possible some of it is just grammar? A tool you picked up so early you forgot it was a tool and mistook it for the shape of thought itself? Sit in that a second, because I'm not going to resolve it, not yet, maybe not ever, fully. But I want that question lodged somewhere behind your sternum for the next hour, because everything else we talk about tonight is going to keep bumping into it from different angles. Picture the actual scene, because this isn't a thought experiment, this really happened. Daniel Everett, American linguist, Christian missionary, who went out there in the 70s to translate the Bible for the Piraha, in one of the great irony is not dead stories of 20th century anthropology, lost his faith and gained a research obsession. Instead, sits on the floor of a stilted hut on the Maichi River with a length of string and some dried corn kernels. He's trying to teach basic counting. He lays out one kernel, says the Portuguese word for 1, lays out a second, 2, the Piraha. Men and women watching him are not confused the way a child is confused before they learn to count. They're doing something stranger. They're recoding it in real time into their own categories. Hoi, a small amount, roughly 1-ish, and hoi, a slightly different tone meaning a few, and refusing, gently, cheerfully, to let the exactness in. Weeks of this. Everett is a serious scientist. This is not casual observation, and the conclusion he eventually published, one that detonated a small war inside linguistics that is still not fully settled, is that this population, healthy, intelligent, fully capable humans, simply does not operate with a concept of exact discrete number the way almost every other language on Earth does. Not, doesn't bother to, doesn't have the cognitive furniture arranged that way. Now here's your first pattern interrupt of the night, because I promised myself I wouldn't lecture you into a coma. Try this. Right now, without looking, tell me how many windows are in your childhood bedroom. Got a number? Good. Notice how fast that number arrived, how automatic it was, how it felt like retrieving a fact rather than performing an act of grammar. That automaticity is the whole trick. You don't experience counting as a language behavior because it's so deeply installed, it feels like perception. A Pirahan speaker would find that exact same mental motion, the compulsion to pin an experience to a discrete integer, about as natural as you'd find describing your bedroom windows in iambic pentameter. Available, maybe, with effort, not the native mode. Here's where it gets genuinely strange, and this is the part I keep circling back to for years. It's not just numbers. Pirahan also, according to Everett's fieldwork, doesn't do embedded recursion. You can't nest a sentence inside a sentence the way English lets you. Say, the man who saw the dog that bit the boy who lives near the river. Each clause stands alone, like beads, not like Russian dolls. And it doesn't have grammatical tools for talking about events outside the direct experience of a living witness. No myth-making about the deep past, no elaborate hypothetical futures, nothing corresponding to worry as an orientation toward events that haven't happened and might never happen. Everett has this phrase for it, the immediacy of experience principle. The idea that Pirahan grammar is essentially built to talk about what is happening, or what someone alive right now personally witnessed happening, and it structurally resists talking about what might happen or what happened before any living memory. And I want to be very careful here, because this is exactly the kind of claim that gets people high on their own fumes and sloppy with the evidence. Some of Everett's specific claims, especially about recursion, are genuinely disputed by other linguists. Noam Chomsky's camp pushed back hard. There's an active academic fight about how much of this is really structural versus how much is cultural choice layered on top of a grammar that could do more. I'm not going to pretend that fight is settled, because it isn't. But here's what nobody disputes. This is a population that, by every measure anthropologists have run, shows dramatically lower rates of anxiety, depression, and suicide than comparable populations, and lives almost entirely without a linguistic apparatus for projecting dread forward into a future that hasn't happened yet. Now turn that around and point it at yourself for a second. How much of what you'd call your anxiety actually, physically, structurally, requires the grammatical move of narrating a future event to yourself in words? Not the raw animal alertness, the genuine fight or flight thing every nervous system on Earth has, but the specific human misery of rehearsing catastrophe in sentences. What if I lose my job? What if they leave me? That's not a feeling arriving raw from your body. That's a sentence you are constructing in your internal voice, out of a grammar equipped to build hypothetical futures, and there is at least one population on Earth whose language barely lets them build that sentence at all, and they seem, empirically, less tormented for it. I'm not telling you to go live on a river and forget how to count. Everett himself has been clear he's not romanticizing them into noble savage mysticism. Pirahan life is hard, dangerous, full of real losses. This isn't a lifestyle brand. What I'm doing is something narrower and, I think, more disturbing. I'm asking you to notice that the specific texture of your inner life, what worry feels like, what a memory feels like, what hope feels like, might be far more downstream of the specific grammar you happen to think in than you've ever had reason to suspect. You didn't choose your grammar. It was installed before you had the tools to evaluate it. And it's been quietly telling you what's real and what's possible ever since. Let's go back further than grammar, though, before any of this. Because there's a population even more universal than the Pirahan that we conveniently forget to interrogate: infants. Every human who has ever spoken a word was, for roughly the first 12 to 18 months of life, a fully cognizing creature with no language at all. And here's the thing, developmental psychology has nailed down pretty hard in the last few decades, using ingenious tools, looking time studies, where you track how long a baby stares at something that violates its expectations, because babies, like all of us, stare longer at surprising things than boring ones. Put an object behind a screen, then secretly remove it, then drop the screen. A 6-month-old will stare significantly longer at the impossible empty space than a normal reveal, meaning the baby expected the object to still be there. That's an inference. That's a physical model of a hidden object persisting through occlusion. That's reasoning. And this baby has no words. None. The reasoning got there first. So here's the question that should be sitting right next to your Pirahan question, sharpening it. If a baby can categorize, infer, expect, even, and this one gets contested, but the evidence is accumulating, shows something like primitive moral evaluation, preferring a puppet that helped another puppet over one that hindered it, all before language shows up. Then what, precisely, is language doing when it finally arrives? It's not switching thought on, thought's already running. So what is it actually installing? Here's my working answer, and I want to flag clearly that it's a working answer, not gospel. This is where the fun genuinely is, in the honest not knowing. Language doesn't create thought. It creates categories with edges, sharp enough to grab and pass to another person. A baby's pre-verbal world, from what we can reconstruct, seems to be more like continuous gradients, more, less, warmer, closer, same, different, rather than discrete, named bins. Language comes in like a knife specialized for cutting continuous experience into named, shareable chunks. Red, mine, later. Each of those words is a decision about where to cut a smooth thing into a bin, and once you've got the bin, you stop seeing the smoothness. The knife becomes invisible, and you start believing the bins were always there, carved into reality itself, rather than carved by you, with a specific tool, at a specific point in your development, using the specific knife your specific culture happened to hand you. That's the whole ballgame tonight, if I'm honest with you this early. Everything else is just more evidence for that one claim, viewed from more angles. Which brings me to the sea, specifically, a sea that was never blue. Homer, and I mean the actual text of the Iliad and the Odyssey. This isn't a rumor. Classicists have combed this exhaustively since the 19th century, when a British Prime Minister of all people, William Gladstone, first noticed and wrote an enormous multi-volume study about it. Homer describes the sea as wine dark, not blue, wine dark, over and over. He describes honey as green, sheep as violet, iron and the sky share the same color word. And it is not just Homer. You can go through ancient Greek, Sanskrit, Icelandic sagas, Hebrew scripture, and there is a documented cross-cultural pattern. The color word for blue, as a distinct basic category from green, shows up conspicuously late in nearly every language family that's been studied, and shows up in a strikingly consistent order everywhere. Black and white first, then red, then usually yellow or green, and blue almost always dead last, sometimes not until well into recorded history. Now, before you run all the way to the wrong conclusion, and people do run there, let me pull you back with the actual science, because this is where the popular version of this story gets it embarrassingly wrong, and the real version is stranger. It is not that ancient Greeks were walking around with some kind of color blindness, unable to physically distinguish a blue sky from a green field. Their eyes had the same 3 types of cone cells yours do. The physical apparatus for detecting the wavelength was fully online. What they lacked was a linguistic category that carved blue out from the broader space of dark, saturated hues that included what we'd now split into blue, green, gray, black. And here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you. A landmark study from MIT researchers a few years back, working with the Himba people of Namibia, who speak a language with an unusual color category boundary of their own, found that Himba speakers could pick out a shade that violated their language's green versus blue adjacent boundary faster than English speakers could, even though, physically, the color difference was just as detectable to both groups' eyes. The category didn't just fail to help them see something extra. In the reverse direction, it was actively making a real, physically present distinction harder for the group whose language didn't mark it. Let that sit for a second, because it's the sharpest version of the whole argument I've got. The category doesn't just describe what you see, it edits your speed of noticing. It's not that the ancient Greeks were blind to blue, it's that blue hadn't yet been cut, as a named thing, out of the larger continuous field of dark, saturated color the way, right now, in English, you don't have a single fast native word cutting apart the 50 different shades of the feeling right before you fall asleep, or the specific dread of an email you haven't opened yet. Those experiences are available to you, physically, neurologically. You've had them, but you don't have the knife for them. So they stay soft-edged, slower to grab, harder to notice as a discrete thing, easy to blur into something more general, tired, anxious, that doesn't quite capture it. Here's your assignment, and I mean this literally, try it tomorrow. Pick one recurring feeling you have that English doesn't have a clean word for, that specific mix of relief and loss when a long project finally ends, or the exact sensation of remembering an old phone number your fingers still know before your mind does, and just name it. Make up a word, use it in your head for a week. I'd bet real money you start noticing that feeling more often, catching it faster, the way the Himba speakers' eyes snapped to the color their language had already cut out. Naming isn't just labeling something you already fully perceive. Naming is a small act of construction. You are not just describing your inner world when you name a feeling. You are, in a small but real way, building more of it. Which is, incidentally, close to the more careful modern version of an idea that got a genuinely bad reputation for decades, the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. Named for linguist Edward Sapir and his student Benjamin Lee Whorf, working mostly in the 1930s and 40s. The crude pop culture version, your language imprisons your thought, if your language has no word for something you literally cannot think it, got thoroughly debunked, and rightly so. It's demonstrably false. People constantly think thoughts their language has no single word for. That's exactly what we just did with the invented word for pre-sleep feeling. The strong version is dead. But something survived the wreckage, something more careful, and I'd argue, more interesting than the strong claim ever was. Language doesn't cage thought, it biases attention. It doesn't determine what you're capable of thinking, it determines what you notice by default, without effort, the first pass, before you go looking for anything extra. The single cleanest demonstration of this that I know of comes from a small Aboriginal community in far north Queensland, Australia, speakers of a language called Gugu Yimithir, and this one, incidentally, is also the origin of the English word kangaroo, which is a fun historical footnote, but not the point tonight. The point is this: Gugu Yimithir has essentially no words for left and right relative to your own body, none. Instead, speakers describe everything, down to move your cup slightly to the north, or there's an ant on your southeast leg, using absolute cardinal directions, the same compass points sailors use, applied at every scale, all the time, automatically. And the documented consequence, studied carefully by linguist Stephen Levinson and colleagues, is that fluent Gugu Yimithir speakers maintain a constant, largely unconscious, dead accurate sense of which way is north, even inside a windowless room, even after being spun around, even in total darkness, not because they're consulting a mental compass on purpose, because their grammar has forced them, since early childhood, to track cardinal orientation continuously as a background condition of being able to speak a normal sentence about where the salt shaker is. You do not have that sense. I do not have that sense. Not because our brains are incapable of it. The underlying spatial machinery is universal. Every human brain can build this, but because our grammar never demanded it of us, so the tracking system that could have been running constantly in the background of your whole life, quietly, effortlessly, from age 2 onward, simply never got switched on. There is a form of orientation to reality, available to the human nervous system, that you have almost certainly never once experienced, and the only reason is a grammatical accident of which language your parents happen to speak to you. So here's the small resolution I promised myself I'd actually let land before I open the next crack, because if I just keep piling up unsettling facts without ever letting one of them pay off, this stops being an exploration and starts being a magic trick, and I don't want to run a magic trick on you. Here's what I think we can actually say, cleanly, with real confidence, after Piraha and Homer and Gugu Yimithir. Your language is not a neutral, transparent window you look through at a fixed reality. It is closer to a habit of attention, installed in early childhood, so deep and so early that it feels like the shape of the world, rather than a specific tool your specific culture handed you. That's not a mystical claim. That's a documented, replicated, thoroughly boring to a cognitive scientist empirical finding. The mystical part, the part I actually can't resolve for you, the part nobody can, is what it means that you've spent your entire conscious life mistaking a tool for a truth. And that small landing is exactly where the floor should start to feel less solid again. Because if language is a tool for attention, rather than a mirror of reality, what happens to a mind that stops using words at all? Not can't, won't, or doesn't, or never learn to in the usual way. There's a real, well-documented, only recently named phenomenon called anendophasia, the absence of an internal verbal monologue. For years, this got treated almost as a rumor, something people assumed was universal, until psychologist Russell Hurlburt started running a technique called descriptive experience, sampling in the 1970s and 80s. You wear a beeper that goes off at random intervals during your day, and the instant it beeps, you write down exactly what was happening in your inner experience the moment before the beep. No editing, no reconstruction. And across decades of this research, a startlingly consistent finding emerged. A meaningful chunk of people, somewhere in the range of estimates from about 5 to 15%, depending on the study and how strictly it's measured, report that their default mode of thought simply isn't verbal. Not verbal but quiet. not verbal but fast. Genuinely non-linguistic images, felt senses, spatial relationships, something people describe, when pressed for a comparison, as closer to a wordless knowing than to a sentence forming. I want you to actually try this right now, because it's the fastest gut check available. Think about what you're going to eat tomorrow. Just go there for 2 seconds. Did you hear a sentence? An actual voice, in something like your own timbre, saying words? Or did something else happen, a flash of an image, a felt pull toward one option, a decision that arrived before any words showed up to describe it, words that maybe only appeared after, as a kind of narration bolted on after the fact? Most people, when you actually stop and check, instead of assuming, are surprised by the answer either way. Some of you just discovered you're more verbal than you thought. A few of you, smaller number, but it's real, just discovered you might have gone your entire life assuming everyone thinks in a voice, when you, personally, mostly don't. And here's the pattern interrupt I promised you, a genuinely funny footnote buried in dead serious research. Some of the earliest resistance to Hurlburt's findings came from people who simply could not believe other humans didn't have an inner voice. And some of the resistance to the opposite finding came from people who couldn't believe anyone genuinely narrates their whole life in sentences. Each side assumed their own inner weather was the species' default, and both were wrong. And there are, apparently, still arguments about this on the internet between adults who are stunned, presumably for the first time in their lives, that other people's heads don't sound like their own. But follow the thread seriously for a second, because it connects straight back to the baby and the Pirahan speaker and the Himba color test. If a meaningful fraction of otherwise completely typical, high-functioning adult humans are running full cognition, complex decisions, creative work, some of history's most articulate writers among them, incidentally, without an internal narrator stringing it into sentences, then the sentence stream you might be hearing right now, as you listen to me, the one possibly narrating, "Wait, do I have an inner voice or not?" That stream is not thought itself. It is, at most, one possible readout of thought, one interface among several the human nervous system is capable of running, and you happen to get installed with this one. The same accidental way the Pirahan speaker got installed with a grammar that doesn't build catastrophic futures, and the Gugu Yimithir speaker got installed with an always-on compass. So notice what your own mind is doing with this, right now, today. Walking around later, not later, today. Try catching the half-second before a thought turns into words, if you're a verbal thinker, or catching what's actually there instead of words, if you're not. You are not trying to stop thinking, you are trying to catch the interface switching on, the way you'd notice, if you paid close enough attention, the exact moment a radio dial finds a station out of static. Which brings me somewhere stranger, and I want to walk into this one carefully, because it's easy to either over-mystify it or flatten it into nothing, and both of those are cop-outs. There's a phenomenon called glossolalia, speaking in tongues documented across an enormous range of religious contexts, most famously certain Pentecostal Christian traditions, but also far beyond them, historically and cross-culturally. And what neurolinguists who've actually studied it under controlled conditions, recording, transcribing, running acoustic analysis on the output have consistently found is fascinating specifically because of what it isn't. It isn't gibberish in the sense of pure noise. It has structure. It follows the phonetic inventory, the actual sound palette of the speaker's native language or languages they've been heavily exposed to. It has rhythm, stress patterns, something that sounds acoustically, unmistakably like language cadence, intonation contours that rise and fall the way real sentences do, and yet, when transcribed and analyzed, it carries no consistent referential content, no grammar in the sense of a system that reliably maps sound units onto stable meanings. It is, and I think this phrase actually earns its keep here, the shape of language with the content poured out. Brain imaging on people in the midst of glossolalic states, from a study led by researcher Andrew Newberg using SPECT scans on Pentecostal practitioners, found reduced activity in the frontal lobes, the region heavily involved in top-down executive control, the part of you that plans, monitors, and, notably, generates deliberate verbal sentences during the glossolalic episode compared to normal prayer. So here's a nervous system in a specific altered state, producing something with all the surface architecture of speech, the rhythm, the phonetic texture, the intonation, the turn-taking cadence, while the part of the brain that normally assembles referential meaning has stepped back from the wheel. I keep coming back to this one because it's the cleanest possible evidence that language has at least two separable layers that we habitually experience as one seamless thing: a form layer, the music of it, the rhythm and structure and cadence, and a reference layer, the part that actually points at objects and events in the world and lets you mean something specific by it. Glossolalia is the form running with the reference switched off. And if that split can happen, if the machinery that makes something sound like meaningful language can decouple cleanly in a living human nervous system from the machinery that actually generates meaning, then the reverse question gets a lot more interesting and a lot more urgent, and it's the one I actually can't put down. What happens when reference shows up with no familiar form to carry it at all? I want to be honest about the territory I'm walking into here, because it's the one that made McKenna both famous and, to a lot of serious researchers, a frustrating figure to take fully seriously, and I don't want to just borrow his confidence without earning it. So let me be precise about what's actually documented versus what's experiential report. DMT, N-dimethyltryptamine, is a naturally occurring compound present in trace amounts in numerous plants and, in small quantities, in mammalian brain tissue itself, and administered clinically or ceremonially, it produces extremely reliably across an enormous number of independent reports collected by researchers like Rick Strassman in the first modern clinical DMT studies at the University of New Mexico in the 1990s. One of the most consistent phenomenological signatures in the entire literature of altered states, a rapid onset, often under a minute, into an environment that a striking number of separate subjects who had no contact with each other independently described using strikingly overlapping language, geometric structures unfolding at impossible speed, a sense of entering a space rather than merely hallucinating within ordinary space. And this is the specific detail that should catch your attention, the overwhelming, near-universal sense that something in that space is attempting to communicate, using a mode that has all the felt urgency and structure of language, without mapping onto any syntax the subject can carry back out. People report being shown things rather than told them, meaning compressed into forms that feel information-dense, almost unbearably so, and that seem to resist translation into English sentences the moment the subject tries to describe them afterward. The same way you can't quite explain a dream's specific texture without feeling the description flatten it. McKenna's own contribution, whatever you make of the wilder edges of his cosmology, was insisting on taking the linguistic character of that experience seriously as data, rather than dismissing it as random noise dressed up by a drug-addled brain. His phrase for it, more or less, was that the visions have syntax, structure, something that behaves like grammar without ever cashing out into words. I'm not going to tell you what that means. I genuinely don't know, and anyone who tells you they know with certainty is selling something. But hold it next to the glossolalia case for a second, because the shapes rhyme in a way that I find hard to ignore. In glossolalia, you get form without reference, the music of language, no cargo. In the DMT reports, across an enormous number of independent, culturally unconnected subjects, you get something closer to the opposite, an overwhelming sense of reference, of dense information genuinely being conveyed, with no stable form available to carry it home. Two failure modes, on either side of ordinary language, both suggesting the same uncomfortable thing. That ordinary spoken language, the thing you and I are doing right now, is one narrow, specific, evolutionarily contingent solution to a much larger, stranger problem, the problem of getting something that exists inside one nervous system into another nervous system, and it is not obviously the only solution, or even necessarily the best one. Just the one your species happened to land on, given the vocal tract and the ears it had to work with. Second release valve, Because I promised myself, and you, that I wouldn't just keep opening doors forever without ever letting you stand inside one for a second. Here's what I think actually lands, cleanly, out of all of this. Meaning and language are not the same thing, and they never were. Meaning is the older, stranger, more universal thing present in the baby before words, present in the glossolalic speaker's suppressed frontal lobe, present in some dense unspeakable form in whatever the DMT space is doing. Language is the specific, narrow bridge one particular species built to move meaning between skulls using breath and a larynx, and 20-some-odd thousand years later, letters and ink. It's an extraordinary bridge. It's just not the whole river. Which is the exact spot where a Swiss linguist working around the turn of the 20th century, Ferdinand de Saussure, becomes suddenly relevant instead of academic, because he's the one who first insisted, rigorously, on a distinction that sounds obvious once you say it, and turns out to be almost impossible to actually feel in daily life. The word tree is not connected to an actual tree by anything except agreement. Saussure called it the arbitrary nature of the sign. There is no rope, no rational bridge, no physical resemblance tying the sound tree, or the French arbre, or the Japanese ki, to the actual leafy thing rooted in the ground outside your window. It's a social contract, arrived at by pure convention, and it works astonishingly well, second to second, for your entire life, specifically because you've forgotten it's a contract. The moment the word and the thing feel connected, feel like the same object almost, the tool has become invisible again. Exactly the way the color word blue became invisible, exactly the way counting felt like perception a few minutes ago, rather than grammar. Here's the pattern interrupt, and it's a cheap one, and I don't care, because cheap tricks reveal real structure sometimes. Say the word spoon out loud right now. Say it again. Say it 8 or 9 times in a row, fast. Somewhere around repetition 6 or 7, for almost everybody who tries this, something strange happens. The word starts to detach. It stops sounding like a word and starts sounding like a noise, an arbitrary collection of syllables with no obvious connection to the object it's named 1,000 times in your life. Linguists call this semantic satiation, and it's not a parlor trick, it's a genuine crack in the illusion. For about 4 or 5 seconds, you're accidentally standing exactly where Saussure was standing, seeing the arbitrary gap between sign and object that's normally invisible, precisely because it works so well. The rest of your life, you live on the far side of that gap without knowing it's there. For 4 seconds, with a spoon, you got to see the seam. Now scale that seam all the way up, and this is where writing comes in. And I promise this is not a boring detour into media history. It's the single biggest cognitive rewiring event in the human timeline that we almost never talk about as a rewiring event. Walter Ong, a scholar who spent decades studying the shift from oral to literate culture, made an argument in his book, Orality and Literacy, that I think doesn't get taken seriously enough outside academic circles, that a mind operating without writing doesn't just lack a tool for storage. It thinks differently, structurally, in real time, because of how knowledge has to be held without an external backup. Think about Homer again. We're back at the wine-dark sea, and it's changed shape since we left it. Those constant, repeated phrases that used to seem to 19th century readers who assumed Homer was a lone literary genius composing on parchment, like stylistic flourish or padding swift-footed Achilles, rosy-fingered dawn, wine-dark sea, itself the scholar Milman Parry demonstrated in the 1920s and 30s by studying still-living oral epic traditions in the Balkans, where illiterate singer-poets improvised enormously long narrative poems in real time, that those repeated epithets are not decoration at all. They're load-bearing memory infrastructure, fixed rhythmic units that let an oral performer, holding an entire epic in a mind with no written backup, snap a name and its formulaic descriptor together instantly, midline, without breaking the meter, buying a half-second of thinking time for what comes next, the way a jazz musician leans on a familiar chord change to buy a breath before the next improvised phrase. An oral mind, in other words, doesn't fail to be literary. It runs on entirely different cognitive infrastructure, rhythmic, formulaic, redundant, communal, built for a world where the only hard drive is other people's memory plus your own, and nothing gets backed up externally. Writing didn't just add a convenience, it changed what kind of thinking was necessary. Once you can look something up, you stop needing the elaborate rhythmic scaffolding that used to hold it in place. And that scaffolding, a huge portion of what oral cultures called wisdom, memory, even a kind of communal identity, atrophies. Quietly, the way a muscle does when you stop using it, and you don't notice, because the book that replaced it feels like pure gain. I want you to notice something about your own mind right now, tonight, listening to this instead of reading it, because you are, for the length of this recording. Briefly back inside something closer to an oral cognitive mode than you probably occupy for almost any other hour of your week. You cannot reread a sentence I just said. You cannot pause and look something up mid-thought without breaking the thread. You are tracking this the way a listener in an oral culture tracked a story by rhythm, by return, by the callbacks I keep planting on purpose. The wine, dark sea, the spoon, the compass you don't have because those callbacks are doing, on a much smaller scale, exactly what rosy-fingered Dawn did for a Balkan oral poet holding 10,000 lines with no page to catch him. You're not reading this, you're holding it. That's a different cognitive act, and it's one your daily literate life mostly doesn't ask of you anymore. Small resolution, second one, before we head into where all of this actually starts to converge. Here's what's actually landed by now. I think, cleanly, every single case tonight, the Pirahan's ungrammatical future, the invisible compass, the untranslatable feeling, the glossolalic form without content, the DMT content without form, the arbitrary spoon, the oral memory scaffolding, every one of these is the same discovery, wearing a different costume. There is a gap between raw experience and the specific tool, your specific culture, at your specific moment in history, handed you to carve that experience into shareable pieces. Most of the time the gap is invisible, because the tool works, because it's been sanded smooth by use since before you could remember not having it. Every so often, a repeated spoon, a color a foreign eye catches faster than yours, a drug pulling the frontal lobe's hand off the wheel, the gap shows itself for a few seconds, and what you're looking at in that gap isn't confusion. It's the seam. It's the actual manufacturing process of your reality, briefly visible, before it stitches itself back into invisibility. Now, small collection I've been saving, because it's the gentlest version of the same idea, and I think it deserves its own moment, rather than getting folded in as a footnote. There are words other languages carry that English simply doesn't have a single term for, and the interesting thing isn't the words themselves, it's what their existence proves. Portuguese has saudade, not just longing, not just nostalgia, but something closer to a specific, almost sweet ache for something absent that might never have existed in the first place, or might never return, even if it did. Japanese has mono no aware, the particular, gentle sadness embedded in recognizing that a beautiful thing is beautiful specifically because it's passing. Cherry blossoms are moving partly because they'll be gone in a week. Welsh has hiraeth, a homesickness for a home, or a version of home, that may not even still exist to go back to. Grief for a place tangled up with grief for a time. You have felt versions of all three of these. I'd bet on it. Everyone has. The feelings themselves are not exclusively Portuguese or Japanese or Welsh property. Human nervous systems don't respect national borders. What's exclusively Portuguese or Japanese or Welsh is that somebody, generations ago, decided that particular gradient of feeling was common enough or important enough to earn its own knife cut out of the continuous fabric of emotion, its own fast access handle, while English speakers just let those same feelings blur into sad or nostalgic and never bothered building the tool. Which means, and this is the actual implication, not just a fun trivia fact, the total map of human feeling is bigger than any single language's grid of it. You are, right now, capable of feeling things you don't have fast words for, the same way the pre-verbal baby was capable of expecting a hidden object, The same way you are capable of noticing a shade of blue adjacent color slightly slower than a himba speaker would. The feeling isn't missing. The knife just hasn't been made yet. So try this, and I mean actually try it, this week. Next time you catch a feeling that doesn't quite fit, happy, sad, anxious, excited, the specific mundane magic feeling of being in a location you'll probably never return to, or the specific hollow relief of a difficult conversation that went better than you feared, don't reach for the nearest generic label. Sit with it uncut for a second. Notice that it has a shape even before you've decided what to call it. That's the pre-verbal baby, still in there, still running, underneath every adult sentence you've built on top of it since. Here's where I think all 6 of these threads actually start touching each other, rather than just sitting next to each other in a neat row, because that's the difference between a list of facts and an actual idea. The Pirahan speaker without exact number, the baby without any words at all, the person with no internal narrator, the glossolalic speaker producing form with the content switched off, the DMT subject drowning in content with no form to carry it, the 4 seconds you spent staring at a satiated spoon. None of these are exceptions to normal human cognition. Off to the side, curiosities in a museum case. I think they're glimpses of the actual substrate that ordinary spoken language sits on top of and mostly hides. A substrate that is wordless, gradient, continuous, almost certainly richer than anything that's ever been successfully carved into a grammar and language. Any language, every language humans have ever spoken, is a specific, narrow, historically contingent set of knives that different cultures brought to that same soft, continuous material, each cutting it into different shapes, each culture's speakers ending up, quite genuinely, noticing a slightly different world as a result, not because the raw material changed, but because the knives did. And if that's true, and I want to be honest, that if is doing real work in that sentence, this isn't settled science. This is where the data runs out and the genuine philosophical vertigo starts. If that's true, then the question I actually can't put down, the one I keep circling back to no matter which thread I pull on, isn't which language sees reality most accurately. That's a trap question. There's no view from nowhere, no knife-free vantage point to check any grammar's accuracy against. The question that actually keeps me up is stranger than that. Given that you are, right now, permanently embedded inside one specific set of knives, installed before you had any say in the matter, how would you even begin to notice the shape of the reality you're not cutting? Not the blind spot you can point to, the way I can point to the missing word for pre-sleep feeling and just go make one. The other kind. The blind spot shaped exactly like the tool you're using to look for blind spots in the first place. Everett had to leave the jungle, in some sense, spend years back in universities, arguing his findings in journals. Before he could even describe clearly what he'd witnessed in Pirahan grammar, the fish doesn't discover water by staying in the water, it has to be hauled briefly onto land, gasping, comparing, before it can say anything coherent about what it was swimming in the whole time. Which raises an obvious, uncomfortable question about you and me right now, mid-conversation, in English, using recursion and exact numbers, and a grammar absolutely riddled with elaborate hypothetical futures. We're the fish. We've been in this water since before we could remember not being in it. And unlike Everett, we don't get to leave and come back with a comparison. So here's what I keep landing on, not as an answer, because I don't have one, but as the actual shape of the question worth sitting with after tonight is over. The Pirahan speaker's uncounted river. The wine-dark sea that was never really about color blindness. The compass you don't have and never will unless a very different grammar had raised you. The 4 seconds a satiated spoon let you glimpse the seam in your own reality. The visionary space that seems to be trying to tell you something in a syntax your mouth was never built to carry back out. All different knives, cutting the same soft, wordless, continuous thing, and every single one of them convincing the person holding it that the cuts were always there, that the shape of the pieces is the shape of the world, rather than the shape of the blade. I don't think there's a way out of that. I'm not sure out is even the right frame out to where, using what, some grammar-free vantage point, that doesn't exist for any creature that's ever lived. But I think there might be a way to hold it a little differently than most people walk around holding it, most days, without ever once noticing there's anything being held at all. So here's where I actually want to leave you, because I don't have a bow to tie on this, and I don't think one belongs here anyway. Somewhere, right now, tonight, there is a feeling running through your body that your language never got around to naming, not saudade, not hiraeth, not anything anyone's ever handed you a word for. Something narrower and more specific to your own life than any culture's general purpose vocabulary was ever built to catch. It's been there for years, probably, fully real, fully felt, in whatever wordless way feelings are felt before the knife gets to them. Nobody has ever cut it out of the continuous fabric and handed it back to you as a shareable thing, a word, a shape, a bin with edges. What would you even call it, if you had to? Not later. Right now, mid-thought, before the part of your brain that likes tidy answers reaches for something close enough and lets the actual thing slip back under the surface, uncut, the way it's slipped back under every other time you've almost